Welcome to our latest transition webinar, the first transition webinar of 2026, designed to help secure a sustainable future for your farm business. I'm your host, Johan Tasker, and as we always say at the beginning of our transition webinars, when we talk about a sustainable future for farming here at Farmers Weekly, we mean a future that is sustainable financially, not just environmentally, and I have to say socially as well. That means profitable farming, and in this webinar we're going to be looking at the formula for family-run farm success. What we're going to do is we're going to discuss how to get the best from team members, whether that's family members or members of your team that are employees, family charters, what they are and how they work, how to manage succession, or at least how to start on that succession journey, and also the importance of good communication when you're running the farm. And to help us do all of this and more, I'm going to introduce our panel of experts. Peter Craven is head of Natural England and a Nuffield scholar who's looked at how family charters work around the world. Paul Harris is the founder and managing director of Real Success Limited, a recruitment and people development consultancy based in the West Midlands. Paul Hardman is a partner and corporate lawyer at Shakespeare Martineau, and Paul has dealt with many family businesses over many years. And last, but by no means least, Andrew Palmer is head of agriculture at Lantra, which develops and delivers training and qualifications to enhance careers in the land-based sector. Now, this is a really popular webinar this evening. We've got lots of questions already submitted. We always, though, do have space for some more questions. If you'd like to submit a question this evening, please do use the chat facility, and we'll try and get through as many of those as we can. In the event that we can't answer your question directly, we will try and get back to you after the webinar. We've got probably about an hour or so, maybe a little bit more, but we will do our best to keep everybody happy. I think we'll start off though by answering the question, what do we mean by a successful family-run farm business? And Paul Harris, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to ask the same question to all of our other panelists. So Paul Harris first, please.
Thank you, Johan, and good evening, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here and contribute to the panel and the discussion this evening. What makes a really great family-run business? I've got sort of on my pad here, I've got 4 or 5 things written down, but I think the clues in the name would be my answer to that question. A successful family-run business perhaps has family relationships at its heart and protects those with vigor and commitment, and recognizes that if it's a family-run business, then it's those relationships perhaps that are at its heart. It's perhaps a business that has already begun the discussion around what succession would look like, and perhaps more importantly is able to have those conversations in a way that is productive for everybody. Another thing I think that I see in really well run family businesses, I was with one yesterday actually in Wiltshire, a shining example of how a family run business can be developed. They have such respect for each other as family members as well as colleagues in the business. This recognition that we are professionals working together in a family-run business, and they treat each other professionally and with respect. Hey, we all fall off that perch occasionally, understandably, as family members, but that you see that shining through in those really successful family businesses. They have a resilience to them. You know, often they are businesses that have been passed down through generations. So there's a backbone of resilience and determination and commitment to get through the difficult situations. And then I suppose the final bit, if I was going to say one of my tips for a successful family-run business, is that we do still have that commercial focus. We're focused on being a profitable, professional business. It goes beyond just a lifestyle business. The really successful ones recognize, yes, it might be a lifestyle, but it's also a business and needs to make profit. So family relationships, respected by each other, resilient, already started the succession conversations, and profitable. And I'm sure if you ask Peter, he might say there's something else that those family-run businesses have as well. But I'll let Peter talk about that.
I'll come on to Peter in a minute. Thank you very much, Paul. Paul, you've covered a lot of stuff there, so thank you very much for that. I'm going to go to Andrew and then Paul Hardman, but Andrew Palmer, if Paul Harris hasn't sort of covered everything, what would you like to add?
Evening, everybody. Thank you, Johan. Yes, I was busy scribbling away, but I think some of the family enterprises that I know of and been involved with in the past in this role and other roles is there's always an assumption that everybody talks to each other, and it's one of the basic skills of people skills is communications. And sometimes with family farms, there's an assumption, oh, so and so does that, so and so does this, and we just get on with it, sort of thing. There's no two-way conversation or 3 or 4-way conversations, and they're all sometimes a little bit tied up in the business, and they don't take time out to talk about the business sort of thing, like, and taking that time away, whether it be, away from the business, not around the kitchen table or in the milk parlor or in the pig pen or something like that. It is a professional business in the end, and sometimes the family element of it just overtakes. It is a business, and it should be not disrespecting anyone who doesn't, but its time should be taken out to treat it as a business.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Andrew. Paul Hardman.
Yeah, it's good evening, everybody. I've written down a few of my own thoughts, starting with adaptability is, I think, a key characteristic of a successful business. In the sense of survival of the fittest, i.e. fittest to its particular circumstances today and looking to the future. But I think part of adaptability is trust. I think adaptability implies taking risks, and I think risk taking means that everybody has a certain degree of trust that either it will work out, or that if it doesn't work out, no one's going to be to blame, and you're not going to have to find yourself on the end of having to shoulder the entire burden of risk yourself if you're one of the participants. So I think some of the themes that have already been mentioned underpin all that, the communication and what we call good governance. And I think governance, if we're talking about what is governance, I think it's a fairly new, well, maybe 5, 6, 7 years maybe concept, but really what that's at the heart of what we're talking about is communication. It's setting out their intentions, being clear about what the future looks like, and spending time and to write it down and to communicate it properly. So I do think that's a very, ultimately, well-run, internally well-run organization means that it's well focused and adaptable to the environment it works in.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. And Peter Craven.
Yeah, I mean, that was brilliant. I'm ticking them all off as I go, and I think we're nearly there. But for me, it's really simple. So family business success is family success and business success. So you need both of them. So that's 2 parts to it. And I think in farming, we can get our heads down and we just focus on the farm comes first, and we're doing everything that we can for efficiencies and getting everybody running around in the right directions and picking up the pieces. And we don't think at all about the family bit. So if we want family business success, we have to think about family success and business. Then how do you do that? So we need governance, just as Paul mentioned. So family governance, and we also need some business governance. What is governance? It's rules. We need some rules. So how do we do that? I drew a simple diagram in my Nuffield, which was picking up a lot of this. You mentioned trust. Trust is the holy grail within a family business. That sits at the heart of it. That's what you're trying to create. What do you need to create trust? You need 3 things. You need honesty, openness, and fairness. It doesn't work if you haven't got all 3 of them. So you do need, if somebody doesn't perceive it to be fair, then the trust breaks down. So honesty, openness, and fairness. That's linked with communication. What is communication? But that's also talking, but that's really the important part about communication. We don't talk about so much is the listening part, and that's listening so that people feel heard and understood. So making the time for people to feel heard and understood. And then there's a circle you can draw around round of all of that, which is respect. And that's something else we don't talk about, but respect is like the air in a room. It's not a problem until there isn't any of it. And so really, and I talk about it that way out, but really, if you're going to tackle this conversation, you've got to work back into the center, because trust is hidden in the middle. First of all, it's respect. So if we're going to have a conversation, and I'm not going to tell you what respect looks like in your farm or your family, but you decide what is a respectful conversation. So if the phone rings, a corn lorry turns up, are we stopping? Are we answering phones? Or are we raising our voice? Are we rolling our eyes? What are we doing? And what does a respectful conversation look like? How do we treat each other? You decide. You can each have an idea of what respect looks like and work your way back in. Communication, honesty, openness, fairness, sharing those conversations, finding a safe way, but getting that trust. And you're absolutely right, Paul. That's the bit we need.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter. So thank you, everybody, for that, because I think it's a really, really good scene setter as to what success looks like. What I'd like to talk about now is how do we get there? Andrew, I'm going to start with you in terms of, I'm not expecting you to give me all of the answers, but let's try and tease this out, because I want to sort of gradually move on to from how we get there into this idea of family charters, how we get the best from team members, be it family members or employees in a small business situation. And of course, all of this is caught up in this whole kind of, as Peter said, family and the business, and everything is together in one site. So it can be close-knit, which is brilliant, but also it can sometimes feel a little bit claustrophobic, and that we sort of want or need to take a break and step away. And that, of course, in farming can be really, really challenging to do. So before I say too much more, Andrew, what are your thoughts on how we sort of start on the way to getting this success?
For me, what I've understood and what I've seen, it's all about just understanding each other and getting going. And sometimes when family units aren't as cohesive as some, don't be afraid of bringing an external body in or person in, just to, in crude terms, be not a referee, but be a facilitator, and sometimes, and once, as Peter's talked about, this trust element and the honesty and all that falls in. But if you're struggling at the beginning, it's very hard to get that initial, start planning that business area, that family area. And you've got to be honest with yourselves. If it's not working when you want to start, let's make that work. Then everything else will fall into place.
Thank you. Paul Hardman, you mentioned governance, I think, was the first one of the first.
It's a good question, very difficult to answer. We really struggle with our clients on this, I have to say. Sometimes there are going to be drivers. There's going to be a budget change, so you need to do something because you can see a deadline coming. Sometimes you're doing something, a transaction, maybe you're incorporating the business. That's a very good reason to start dusting down the corporate governance documentation, start thinking about how it's going to look and who's going to get what, and all that sort of planning that goes into it. So there's a sort of natural point at which it will all come together. But by and large, if you're sort of sitting there in your farm and you're contemplating the future, you're probably contemplating your own death at that point, and you're thinking what comes next, and that is not a comfortable starting point. So inevitably, it's a difficult subject to tackle, I would say. I mean, I'll let others speak to how you get there, but certainly if you're whenever a client is coming to me, I'm looking for somebody to drive the project forward, and if I haven't got that, it won't happen. So it really does need somebody to drive it, and it's normally somebody. It can be some bodies, 2 or 3, but if it can't be a whole committee. It's going to be driven by one individual or maybe 2 maximum, who've got a sort of, if it's 2, then they have to be pretty aligned in terms of what they want. Because you do need to, if we're ultimately producing something which we're going to put out to everybody to say this is what we think, then your authors, as it were, have to be of a similar sort of mind. I hope that. So I haven't really answered your question, but I hope that gives you a few ideas.
I'm going to stay with you, Paul, just for a moment. I mean, you're talking about corporate governance documentation. I imagine that a lot of our viewers and indeed Farmers Weekly readers and listeners to our podcast will be thinking, well, I don't even know we don't have anything like that. we just get up and do what needs to be done. There's on a lot of family farms, there's not much in terms of, there might be a partnership agreement, but there'll be lots of farms that are a partnership that don't actually have a written agreement. So where do we go to? Let's sort of leave the family charter thing just to one side for a moment. But what would
you're tempting me to start talking about family charters, but okay, I'll try not to. Corporate governance, what does it mean? Again, it does. It sounds very sort of things that a sort of PLC would have in place. Yes, but it can be much looser than that. We're talking about the collection of sort of understandings between the individuals who own or run the business that they are all working to. I mean, I sometimes use the analogy of a ship leaving a port and knowing where it's going and what its cargo is and who's on board. It's that sort of idea of, okay, we know where we're going with this, and there is a sort of sense of a destination around it. But there are all these other things that you have to think about in terms of how you're going to get there. So it's anything which records that. So it actually could be, if we were to describe it, it could be emails, it could be a sketch, it could be, it doesn't have to be even written down, words, it could be a map. Anything which reflects those sorts of intentions, that everyone has a common understanding about what they're working towards as a collective.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. And Paul Harris, I'm going to go straight to you. I can see you're itching to.
Yeah. I'm going to take us in a slightly different direction, but not a tangent. It's actually absolutely answering your question. But in my experience, sometimes there's a stage before we get to talk about corporate governance, which is actually, we're not even talking about even where the farm's going to go yet, because sometimes the catalyst to start a conversation can be from a less positive scenario. So if I can think of an example where I was asked to go and help a family where they were struggling to get the conversation about succession planning and where the farm goes. And cutting a long story short, when I asked around the room, it wasn't about the farm. So we didn't start talking about the farm. We talked about family first. And actually what transpired, the biggest fear the current farm owner had in terms of their succession was she wasn't seeing her grandchildren. Nothing to do with the farm. There was a relationship issue within the family that needed to be resolved first before they could even get to sit down to talk about what the succession plan for the farm looked like. And I do find sometimes that I call that family liaison rather than succession planning. It's like the precursor to getting your family charter sorted or your corporate governance. Is a lot of farms I work with are not at that stage. They're not even talking about it at all because there's a concern that daughter-in-law's going to the family and she's going to take over the farm and get a grubby little hands on our farm, and all these sort of emotions are there around what happens on farm. And so my view is yes, you might need some help, but we have to address the underlying feelings that people have got about the future before you can start talking about, well, where are we with the assets and what governance documents do we need. Now that might be controversial, but that's certainly how I look at it. Is let's talk about family first in a family run business, I sort of go with what Peter was saying, really, about you've got the family issues and you've got your business issues. My advice, purely my advice, others are available, is I'd start family first before I start talking about the business. Because if you can't work and communicate together as a family, almost everything else is going to break down. So last thing I'll say, then I'll shut up. I had a conversation with a couple of clients, two brothers who were falling out significantly. And I said, start with your relationship as brothers. Repair that first. Because if you haven't got that repaired, it's going to be very difficult for you to find a way to work together in the future. And they did. And then they were able to be in a position to start talking about it. So again, I'm not sure that answers your question either, but my advice would be, if there's family repairing to do, repair that before you try and have a detailed conversation about governance and systems. I've got other things to talk about in terms of communication between families, but that's, I think, my answer to your question.
Yeah, thanks, Paul House. And I really like that you brought out that whole thing that Peter mentioned, which is about family and about business, and we've got to have success from both those perspectives. I also like what Paul Hardman was saying about a ship leaving the port, knowing the destination, who's on board, who's not on board, where's it actually going. So that was good as well. Let's go into family charters then. And I apologise to Paul Hardman for sort of steering him away from it and giving Peter Craven the opportunity to sort of broach the subject of family charters, but everybody will be able to comment on what Peter's going to say and how it works and whether it works and what the best thing is. But Peter, so we don't need to write things down, but family charters, explain those.
Yeah, well, we do need to write things down. And just to correct, just before I get Marion Spain on the phone, who is the head of Natural England, not me. I'm I'm head of agriculture, and I don't want Tony Juniper as head of our board. So thank you for that. Thank you for that elevation, Johan. But no, I'm merely head of agriculture.
Head of agriculture.
Yes,
sorry,
thank you.
Apologies.
So, I mean, Paul is right when he's talking about there are some preamble stuff here to go on. So there's really three questions to address at the start of all of this conversation, which is number one is, do we want to remain as a family and business? It's a simple question, but it's an important one. Do we want to remain as a family and business? Second question, if we do, this is all simple stuff. If we do, how are we going to do it? So how are we going to do that? Also, if we don't want to remain as a family and business, how are we going to do that also? So we've got to think about that. And if that is actually we can't get on and we have to split this thing, how are we going to do that? Because that just doesn't happen overnight. So are we growing this business for 10 years? Are we going to look to buy somebody out? What are we doing here? So there are some questions. The third question is then, who are we calling family? Are we including spouses and stepchildren? What is that? What are we doing there? So there's some important questions there. A lot of this that drives these family charters is this question, why? And I asked over 100 family businesses that the ownership sort of part of those businesses, why are they doing what they're doing? And as I reflected, why are you changing irrigators at 10 o'clock on a Sunday evening? Why are you doing it? And you ask the people, and you ask them 5 times, and by the end of it, they're not really sure why they're doing this anymore, and they can start off with a few ideas, but when they come back and they think about it and they've really sort of filtered and distilled their thinking, it always comes back to the same 3 things. And that's, we want our family to be happy, we want them to get along, and we want them to do well. And you can argue what happiness is, but ultimately they want their families to get on, not like this, and they want them to do well. And that doesn't mean do well. They have to be in the business to do well. If they want to be a rock star, great. That's brilliant. We'll back you. But they want them to be happy, get along, and do well. So that why is a good place to start in your family charter to sort of just write down, why are we doing this? What's the purpose of this business? And then the next time we're smashing heads in the farmyard, why are we doing this? To be happy? Hang on, are we being happy right now? Are we getting along? Is this about doing well here? So this is a good sort of a steer. And also there's a part in that sort of family part to it all of where we're going. So I think Paul just mentioned about vision there, and it's a word you might think is a bit corporate, but you just think of it as a direction. And this idea, you can't lead anybody anywhere if you don't know where you're going. So there has to be some idea of where you're going. So what's your ambition? Succession. I think I did my Nuffield presentation without saying the word succession. But what do we mean by that? And really, there's two parts to it. And there's a huge part about management first. Actually, we're talking about management succession and the skills and how we're bringing those people through. Before we talk about any of that ownership stuff, we're nowhere near in a position to talk about the ownership stuff. There's a whole lot of just day to day, how do we managing this business and getting that succession right? So there's a few things there. Paul mentioned death. Scary for some to talk about, but I mean, Stephen Covey, he talked about this idea of legacy, and I think it's an important thing for people just to reflect on. Start with the end in mind. What will people say about you at your funeral? In fact, rather than what will they say, how do you want them to talk about you at your funeral? How do you want your friends to talk about you? How do you want your family to talk about you? How do you want to be seen? How do you want to be remembered? Because there's some blooming disaster stories in families in farming businesses through the generations, and just sort of thinking about some of that is a good reflectant place to take your brain to and just think, what are we doing here? How am I going to do this well? What do I really want? And if I do want to be happy, for my family to get on and do well, then how are we going to do that? And we've got to put something in place to do that. So that's sort of a bit of preamble.
Thank you very much. And I guess, well, it's a good perhaps point to point out that when we talk about fairness, that doesn't always mean equal. And there are a couple of questions here. One is, what are the effective ways to achieve a good work-life balance while managing the demands of a family farm? And there's, if I can find the similar question, how do you achieve a work-life balance while also pulling your weight on the farm when your other family members are working more hours than you do, but they don't have a young family, for example, but you do? It's a difficult question. I always feel bad because I sort of throw these questions out and expect answers from the panel, at the drop of a hat, which it's easy to ask some questions, not always easy to answer them. But Andrew Palmer, I mean, this whole idea of work-life balance might be two family members, maybe of a similar age. One has a young family and the other doesn't. One can obviously work longer hours because that person doesn't have the demands of a young family, and the other person is less available for work. So how do we get that balance right? Oh, you're on mute, Andrew.
Sorry about that. Big question, and it's a very hard one to answer. That work-life balance. I'm of the generation where my family, my parents worked every hour, should we say, sort of thing, and then I progressively, as I did my career, started in agriculture, I was in that same mindset, working, and didn't see many weekends off, sort of thing. But as we move on and times are changing, there is more acceptance for work-life balance, but it's how you find it is the question. And again, it boils down to that understanding, that family cohesion, because if you haven't got that cohesion to, yes, brother one's got two younger children, but brother one maybe hasn't got any children, sort of thing. It's just that it's that communication, as I said up from the beginning, working together. It is a society thing now where you are expected to have a better work-life balance, but when the jobs are piling up and the business pressure is there, the default is just to sling it all in, get all the hours done, sort of thing. And it does come at a cost sometimes, and it's observing that, and sometimes you just need that external person just to say, look, you need to take your foot off the gas here. I know it's hard, the business will be struggling a little bit, but it can't cope without you. We mentioned in a previous question, the death question. If the family is open and honest, what happens if, for argument's sake, brother one doesn't turn up for work the next day because he didn't wake up? What impact will that have on the business? And if that's, it's a frightening situation, but it does happen in some cases where businesses just stand still because of a untimely death or an accident. And if that's related to excessive work because of the work-life balance, we're not addressing it. It's got to be seen as a big negative sort of thing.
Thanks, Andrew. Paul Hardman, I mean, I guess this comes back to things like corporate governance documentation in terms of having roles and responsibilities and clearly defined roles and responsibilities, so people know where they are. There's a question here: how can family charters help in resolving conflicts and improving communication among family members involved in the business alongside non-family member stakeholders, it says here. So yeah,
I think that's right. Look, I mean, one of the questions occurs to me you want to ask yourself is, how many people can the farm business actually support? Because I think being honest with that is a good starting point. And then I think the other point is to say, what sort of jobs are required to be done? And then following from that, when? In other words, could they be done at night? Is somebody actually doing a large part of the manual task and taking on the office task? Or in other words, could that be allocated in a different way? All of that requires communication. The other thought that occurs to me is fairness. Okay, so there's a concept in law, without getting too detailed, called equity, and equity roughly translates to fairness. Okay, so what is equity? Equity is fairness, and the courts have created these touch points, as it were, for fairness, and one of them is equity is equality. So that basically means that unless you say something, the courts will assume, and the law will assume, that you're equal partners in a venture. So it's incumbent on you, the individuals in the venture, to work out if that really isn't the case. So if we're talking about the burden not being shared equally, then it's incumbent on both the person who is having a tough time of it and the person who is perhaps taking less of the burden to both recognize and communicate their positions, so that this is quite philosophical, but yes, what it boils down to as you rightly say, Johan, is a set of descriptions, expectations, hours, and rewards that go with it.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Paul Harris, I mean, you've recently written a white paper about the future of farming, but what you're saying is that the biggest threat to the industry, and we know that family farm businesses are at the core of UK agriculture. The biggest threat is no longer a labour shortage, but a failure of leadership culture and people management. This whole idea of people management is really, really fundamental to the success of the family farm.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting listening to this discussion just now about this challenge that those of us that work in farming see all the time between different family members that are doing slightly different roles. And one of the things I talk about in the white paper is the change in mindset that we need as an industry. And Andrew hinted at it, is that there is still, particularly of my generation, a mindset that number of hours worked equals respect and credibility, as opposed to quality of work done equals credibility and respect. So this idea that what can happen is that there's one member of the family that's got no children, he can work all hours that God sends, and he's working perhaps out on the farm and wants to be with the rest of the team who are also working 100 hours a week or whatever, and yet his sister is doing the office work and she's got some young children and she's not working as hard as he is. So I think we mentioned clarity of roles, but we've also got to get away from this idea that the number of hours that we work is some sort of badge of honor, and have a respectful conversation about what type of role we're going to be doing on the farm. There is no reason why we can't run a farm, and I think Paul mentioned it just now, if we have the right amount of resource on the farm. What can we afford to employ? And to employ some people, if you can afford it, and I know there's pressure on margins at the moment, to enable you to take time off, to enable you to go on holiday with your children. The amount of farmers I speak to that said they never went on holiday with their children because they couldn't get off the farm. Well, I think, a successfully run family business can have enough resource where we can manage different types of roles on the farm, different brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers doing different roles. There was never a challenge, I don't think, historically that, and I'm talking very historically now, that, dad was out on the farm, mum was doing the books. There didn't ever seem to be a challenge there that was a problem. It seems to have become a problem more recently, that we're sort of challenging each other on the value of our roles. So don't see numbers of hours of a badge of honor. Let's get job roles really clearly, as Andrew said. Let's have some job descriptions and clear roles and expectations on what that role requires, and see it as the value added to a business rather than the numbers of hours worked. And if necessary, I was thinking, and Peter may have something to say about this as well, having it as part of our family charter, having a set of core values. And if one of those core values is family time, we shouldn't then be criticizing somebody who wants to prioritize family time. We should be saying everybody should have the opportunity to go to their school plays with their children. And we've got to find a way to work that out. So perhaps having a set of core values that we can also come behind that enables things like, let's accept the fact that people have got different roles and we've got family responsibilities. Some of those things can help reduce those tensions that you mentioned. I'm happy to talk about other things I put in the white paper, Johan, but the one really was about this working hours obsession, that we've got to be doing lots and lots of hours or else we're not being productive. The next generation do not want to work 70, 80 hours a week and only have 2 days off every 2 weeks. So if somebody is in your farm and they're your family and they're saying, I'd really like to have my weekends off, or I'd really like to go to Johnny's rugby this afternoon, the best family businesses are making that happen.
Thank you. Thanks. Peter.
I mean, I didn't talk about values, but they are probably the number one biggest thing to get right in a family business. So we've all got values around this table, and they'll all be great, but they'll all be different. If we're going to be in a business together, we have to have some shared values and agree what we all share on and what we're going to take forward. So those values drive behavior, and just understanding values drive behavior, and behavior drives the culture and everything else that follows. So if we have a value, and in farming, we may choose the value hard work is valued in farming. So if it is valued in farming, don't come and expect to have a week off in the middle of grain harvest. It's not going to happen. It's going to annoy everybody, because that is a fundamental value that's driven this business from the start, and it continues into the future, backed by hard work, and we expect to see you working hard. So so some of that, I think I went to meet in Australia, in New Zealand. I met Daisy Ball. He was one of the biggest potato growers in New Zealand. 7 brothers, 2 sisters, and 7 next generation, all working alongside each other. And I said, Christ, how do you do that? How do you get on? And he said, we can't afford not to get on. It's just, and when you create a business, you've got all those people that you're responsible for. So he was talking, and you just, as you mentioned, clearly defined roles and responsibilities. But then alongside that, bringing in the ownership and the accountability. So giving the space to those people to have those clear roles, but then they have to be accountable to that role and come back and report on how they're getting on, and they're accountable to it. But basic stuff. I mean, people fall out over the fun, the silliest, the smallest things, and it could just be time off. If somebody's having time off, don't be sneaking around doing it. If you want to leave and pick the kids up or whatever it is you want to do, we've all got our lives. Let's put it in the diary. Have a farm diary. Everybody can see it. It's in the reception. If you want every day off at 5 o'clock to do it, that's important. One of my values. Okay, here we go. Talk about natural England. I'll bring it in for a second. We've got 4 values: ambitious, collaborative, inclusive, and act with integrity. So everything we do is driven by those values. They're also work for me really well, but that's great. So everything we're doing, if it falls in line with being ambitious, inclusive, collaborative, with integrity, then that's us. That's who we are. Cut us open. That's driving our decision making. So. Yeah, and getting off farm, continuous learning. I mean, we haven't really talked about it, but creating that time. I mean, for me, the biggest transformational thing in my life was taking 3 weeks away to go on a Worshipful Company of Farmers course. Just taking yourself away, being with other people. You think you're king of your own castle. You go and sit beside some other great people, and suddenly you realise you're not half as good as you thought you were. But you're learning from that cohort, holding yourself to higher account. Just really great thing to look out over your hedge and see what else is going on.
Can I just add to what Peter said? I have this phrase, when in doubt, get your values out. It's like a criteria for if you're trying to make a difficult decision and you're trying to think, does this work for us or not? Is this the right thing for us to do as a family business or not? When you go back to your values, and so when you're in doubt, get your values out, it can really help you shape the decision-making process about what's important. So as I say, if one of our values is hard work, then we don't take holidays. If you're a dairy business, in carving, if family time is a family or family orientated is a value, then we have to live by it. The other thing I would say about values is that you've got to be serious and live by them. They can't just be words on a wall or on a poster. You've got to absolutely live by them. And I think before we get into again, the corporate governance side of what's going to happen to assets and who's going to have what, is getting some of this real foundation work in place first. Almost, I think, as Peter said, almost the basis of a family charter is our joint values that we can all get behind.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Paul Hardman, is it difficult to get all of this stuff together in a form that actually is meaningful, like a working document, or that's a sort of corporate governance document that you spoke about? Is it expensive? Is it hard? How do we do it?
Yeah, good question. Well, like I said a bit earlier, it depends what your drivers are. If you've got a few deadlines to meet, things can happen, and can happen quite quickly. And it also depends how decisions are made. So if it's, I mean, ultimately it's an inclusive process, and it's, if I may talk about family charters, they are they're not legally binding. So you do need buy-in. You do need people to. It's not legally binding, so you might say, well, therefore it has no legal teeth, but it has huge amounts of moral teeth, if you see what I mean. But to get that moral teeth, you can't just be drafting a document in an office somewhere and saying, this is our family charter. That's it. You've got to have a process of including everybody and making sure everyone's happy with what has been stated. I think to just expand a little bit, it kind of depends that beyond that, what are the implications of what's in that document? If our starting point is a family charter, I mean, I see the family charter as being an overarching document within which you have a number of other legal documents. So you will have things like partnership agreements or shareholders agreements if you're a company. You will have things like the Articles of Association if you're a company. You might not immediately, but in due time, you might be talking about prenups or postnups. You might be looking at wills and who succeeds. So you've got all these other legal documents dotted around, and we talked briefly, didn't we, about roles and responsibilities, and you would expect those to go either into a partnership agreement or into an employment contract, depending on what the relationship between the individual and the business was, as vis-a-vis employment or self-employed. So you've got all those things, And that sounds a bit daunting, doesn't it, as a shopping list? I think I would suggest that the legal things happen when they have to happen, and the family charter is something that takes its own time, has its own pace, and has and goes along above all those other legal documents. That would be my recommendation.
So it doesn't have to be that onerous, time-consuming, or daunting. Is what you seem to be saying.
I think I think it very much depends what you want to achieve by it, and how far you're going to go into the detail. I think if we start with things like the and how difficult the conversations are going to be. If we start with things like the family values, I think that would be that's not going to be too difficult to get there with a statement of family values, because I think that's going to be one of those things that everyone can agree on. And I always start these sorts of meetings. You want to start with things you can agree on, and then work down towards the things you don't agree on, rather than vice versa. So you have a nice sense of momentum in the meeting as you hit the things that you are more difficult. So you then one of the points to make about Charlie Chart is that you do need to review them pretty regularly as circumstances change. So as they're a document that will evolve. So I'm not really giving you an answer, but it doesn't need to be a massive, right, we're going to tackle the entire world process. It can be, right, let's start with what we all can sign up to, we're all happy with, and maybe looking at one of the tougher issues, like involvement in the family business, the family farm business, and like succession and what's going to happen there.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Andrew, do you want to come in on this? From your experience, have you done something like this before?
I'll confess I haven't, but so I'm not as expert as some of the guys on the panel to talk about this. But yeah, again, it just boils down to that initial opening conversation of just families just talking to each other, and everything else just starts to build. And whether it's the legal documentation or it's the overarching, the values sort of thing we've been talking about, it's that old adage, just get talking. If there's not talking, well, let's start with, as Paul said, let's start with that initial thing. Let's get the little things out the way that are affecting the bigger decisions being talked about, sort of thing.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter. The whole talking things. Well, it's easy to talk about talking, but sometimes it's difficult to do. When family members, some family members might not want to talk and might not want to engage.
Yeah, and there's 100 reasons why we shouldn't do this. We haven't got time, we haven't got money. Nobody wants to have this conversation. I mean, I scribbled down. How do you start? The biggest question is, how do you start this thing? And you just asked Paul, does it have to be complicated? And that idea of kissing it and keeping it simple. Certainly, these are living documents. They change as your family changes. I would suggest you keep it simple for a start, but it doesn't have to. It can be as simple or as complicated as you want. It's really, what are we going to fall out over, and how are we going to put something in place to stop that? So there'll be tons of things we could fall out over, but let's just deal with a few. And one of the big things, I mean, Paul just mentioned there, but how are decisions made? How do we make decisions? Do we do them sort of democratically, autocratically? How does that work? So there's some simple things just to get right. But I mean, if you're looking at the process, if you were to go home today and to sit down at the table with your family, or get the right people around the table, what are we building here? It's a good question. What are we building? Who decides what? I mean, it might be obvious, but who does decide what? And how do we decide on money and conflict? And I write it down, review it annually. And the aim's not for perfection, but for progress and fewer surprises. And it's just really taking some of that conflict out of the game. But it doesn't have to be complicated, and there's different ways to come up with the answers. I mean, ways I've seen people ask questions, or they start the process, and Paul mentioned doing it in a nice way, but what are some of the favorite family traditions or rituals that we have as a family? They don't have to be talking about any of that other stuff, but what resonates with us? What are our special memories? What are the qualities or traits that make our family different? Because they will have little traits, and it's these conversations that you sort of tease out and you think, well, that all sounds a bit woolly and stuff. But when you start to it starts a conversation and the people, it's not a conflict conversation. It's like almost a memories of when what do you love most about our family? This sort of stuff. But then when you're talking about values, I mean, remember a time that when you were proud of the family, or a lesson that you learned from a family member, stuff like this. I mean, it just it's asking the questions in a different way to come up with what you're trying to get to. So, I mean, your values. What does that value mean to you? Why is it important to you? How does it influence how you act? And so, it's just sort of asking the question in a different way to really dig into what's driving people, and then stopping and giving people the opportunity to talk and the others listen to hear some of that information. Really important. I don't know if I've just said anything of any use there or not, but this decision making is really important. I could talk about, I won't go on, but that's a key one to get right. How do we make decisions? Because sometimes somebody will go out and buy something without telling somebody, or the father will go and buy a field next door. We haven't got money for X, Y, and Z, and the field next door comes up for sale, and of course we've got money to buy that all of a sudden. My grandpa used to say the best time to buy land is when it's for sale.
Can I come in here?
Yeah, sure.
Add to what Peter's saying. So, been listening to a lot of what Peter was just saying, and it's been something I've been meaning to come back to. We talked about how do we avoid conflict? Why does Granddad want to go and buy a field? One of the things that I think often is missed by family businesses, by family members, is something that we have as the centre of our business, which is understanding people have different personalities, and that can be absolutely the case within families. So, dad can be falling out with son because dad is somebody who's extremely cautious, extremely detail orientated, doesn't want to change things. And son's personality is because I'm somebody who wants to change everything, come up with new ideas, and they're constantly clashing. I wrote a book about it. And this idea of, first of all, before we even get in again to deep conversations about money, let's understand that we might be coming at this from a different perspective. Partly it's our values, but it's also actually our wiring. We're physically wired differently. All of us listening, watching this webinar will have partners, children, friends, colleagues who are different to us. And actually spending a bit of time to do some personality profiling, our system's called Vita profiling, and we find it be transformational to understand, oh, I see why you're like that now. I understand why you're cautious and why what I'm doing is rubbing you up the wrong way. So for me, and I know I'm not necessarily going down the governance route, my angle is very much the relationship route to give you the platform on which to build the governance. And understanding that people have different personality styles is genuinely transformational. I know Andrew's done some work with us on this, and just that understanding can instantly reduce conflict. You're very blunt, Dad. Mum, you're too blunt. You're just too direct. It upsets me. Well, you should just man up. What's the matter with you? And all that is because there's a lack of understanding that we're wired differently. So I would really encourage everybody, other systems are available, but go out and get your family profiled so you understand where your differences begin, and then you can start to work around them and reduce those conflict conversations really quite dramatically.
There's a sort of a real life question here then from Edward O. Allen Stevens, who's sent a question. Paul, just stick with you. You can answer this. He says, how do you deal with difficult conversations with family members that would rather agree simply to avoid conflict? So they're not really, I guess, saying what they want to say, but they're just agreeing to avoid conflict. And
Well,
then,
you've nailed it.
then
Exactly.
and-
This is an exact example I'm talking about. Is that somebody that is conflict averse? They don't want to have a difficult conversation. And I just want to get on and have this conversation. What's the matter with them? Why don't they talk to me? The first thing we have to understand, and this is a phrase I use, we've all heard the phrase, treat other people as you wish to be treated. Yeah, that's very much about respect and honor and everything else. But we should speak to other people when we're having these sort of conversations in the way that they wish to be spoken to. So if you have a parent that doesn't really want to go there at all, insisting that they do, challenging them why they won't, is not going to necessarily get them to open up. It's actually, I understand this is really difficult, Mum, Dad. I don't want to put you in a difficult situation. I know it's awkward. We'll do this gently. We'll take our time. If you'd like to, we can get somebody in to help us. We change our whole tone of voice. We do all those things that adapt to the style of the person that we need to talk to. So what I would say to the answer, was it Edward, to the question, is see the situation not through your eyes, but through the eyes of the person who's struggling with that situation. And if you flip it round, you can suddenly go, oh, okay, I need to have a different tack here. The answer to the question is gently catch the monkey with that one. Going in with size 9s is not going to get you the conversation.
All right, thanks. In a minute, Peter.
I've got just come on. Can I just follow?
A minute, and then Andrew. Yeah, okay. All right.
It was just to say, it's not to answer Ted's thing, but the golden rule, treat others how you want to be treated. I heard this week the platinum rule, which I'd never heard before, which I just wanted to share. Treat yourself how you'd like others to be treated. Treat others how, but you never treat yourself in the same way. I'd never heard that before. I thought it was inspirational. I thought I'd share it. Nothing to do with this conversation, Johan. I apologise.
I'll come back to you in a minute, Peter. But Andrew, Paul Harris is saying you've done some work together or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's the profiling of individuals. It all sounds very corporate and all that sort of thing, But many years ago, I was instructed to go on a person development course because I was a very good pig unit manager, but I was absolutely terrible with people, sort of thing, And one of the first tasks that my line manager had to do at the time was go to my team and do a 360 analysis of me, of how they perceive me, and it absolutely frightened me to death, sort of thing, But actually, it was quite an eye-opening sort of thing, what I thought was my frustrations was they're just wanting to help more, sort of thing, and then move on 5, 10, 15 years, the work we've done with Paul, sort of thing, we go in and do full business teams, and we have all these teams and they're all profiled and they all go into 4 different corners of the room and they all start pointing at each other and going, oh, that's why it's like that. That's right. So why don't we do that with families?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we do that with families, sort of thing? We are a professional business, sort of thing. Larger businesses do it with their teams and they see very significant results in team dynamics and performance and all that sort of thing. But we don't do it. It's not the norm in families. Let's just spend a bit of money, have a bit of time out, and get someone to come in and profile a family, because you'll find out a lot of hidden truths just by someone coming and doing this sort of thing.
Thank you. Thanks. Paul Hardman, is there anything you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, I think what I would suggest, certainly it's not quite answering the particular question, is how do you get people to come out of themselves, but I do think I will think that the law is a very useful toolbox here, or has certain tools that are very helpful. If you're thinking about coming together, one of the things to think about is the business, how it serves the bigger community, and the greater need of that business and the people that work in it and the community that it serves. So it's not just about something where you've got 2 people at loggerheads and they're thinking about dividing the spoils. There is a third person in the room, and that's the business itself. And if you can get them to turn their attention to the business and what the real needs of the business are, you can then begin to get people to come together. The other point about it is that certainly if you're talking about directors have a legal obligation to speak up, to take an interest, and it's incumbent on them, therefore, to sometimes have those difficult conversations where they do disagree. And of course, you've got the process that helps here, because once you've written it down in a minute, so and so disagreed with so and so, it looks much less sort of antagonistic than it might be, as it were, in the moment. So I think the process of discussion and writing down and minute taking is also very helpful, and reminding yourselves that you have an obligation to speak up, not just for yourself, but for the business itself.
Thank you. And we put in farming lots of sort of emphasis on things like animal husbandry, crop management, etc., but not so much on people management, I guess. Paul Hardman, you know, the sort of stuff that you're talking about, people can do a little bit of training on that. They can find out quite easily how to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, most of the training I've done is on director duties, I have to say. So, but there are similarly, I mean, there and they are available through, you know, Institute of Directors. I used to do some training with them. Always a good idea, and it is amazing. And I've done them one-to-one with clients, and it is amazing how you can really see people's eyes opened to what it is to be a director, and what the responsibilities are, and yes, how they should participate in the discussions to answer that particular point.
Yeah, and I guess it's so easy to set up a company these days that with a click, literally with a click of a mouse or a few clicks of a mouse, you can create a limited company. And I guess there'll be a lot of people out there who don't actually realise what their obligations as directors
Yes.
Might be.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. That's absolutely right. There's no formal training required.
Yes,
You
yeah.
can actually, just as you say, form a company and
Yeah.
be a director.
Yeah, a bit like being a parent, you know.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, maybe there's more to it.
Yes, there you go. There you go. Paul Harris, we've got about probably 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes left max. But Paul Harris.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on what Paul's just said, actually, is that, and again, if we think of this in the context of a family business, but all of agriculture really, you can become a director, as Paul's just said. That's a relatively straightforward process. Learning to be a leader, to me, is something very, very different. And actually, you know, what we sometimes forget when we're running a family business, whether we're director of that business or not, we are leading invariably other people. We could be leading our children. And sometimes I think leadership can be learned. It is a skill that can be learned, but we don't spend enough time sometimes as family business owners thinking, well, I need to develop my leadership skills and my management skills in the same way as I do my technical skills. Often across the industry, people are promoted into serious positions of management based on their technical ability rather than their ability to manage people. So I think it's across the whole of agriculture, but particularly in family businesses, we often think, well, we can just get away with it because it's my son or my daughter. Learning how to lead people, particularly if you're a bigger family business that's employing staff, I think is also a critical element of success for family businesses. And that is a skill that can be learned. You can go on programs and courses, and you do have to learn it. You know, lots of people want to be leaders. Lots of people think they can be leaders. Lots of people shouldn't be leaders because they don't have the skills to do so. So I would certainly recommend to everybody who's got a family business, invest in your leadership and management skills alongside your technical skills, financial skills that you might already have. It's the future of the industry depends on it, really.
No, thank you, Paul Harris. Thank you. I'm going to sort of draw it to a close a little bit. Before I do, I'd like people to give their final thoughts. And Peter Craven, I think you went last time, so you can go first on this. I mean, in terms of people taking away a key message or two from this webinar, what are your thoughts? What would you like people to do?
Yeah, I'm not really sure we answered Ted's question, but that bit about silence is a problem. And of course, conflict, nobody likes conflict. And when things go quiet, I mean, in a funny way, when they're noisy, it's healthier than when they go quiet. It is important. So how would I do that if I was going to give? I guess I would challenge people to just think about whether they can come and share then, but if they certainly think about what do you want for you. So if you think about the next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next 30 years, but what do you want for you? What do you want for your family? And what do you want for the business? And if you were going to start thinking about what that is, and I know for me, that was quite profound when I was starting to ask those questions of myself, and they aren't easy questions to answer, and they might take a year to work out, and you still might not know them after a year. So that's where I found myself. But what do you want for you? What are your personal objectives? You might have business ones. That's easy. But what are your personal objectives? What do you want for you? So I think that'd be my challenge, just to start people thinking, and then you come together and look at, so what's this look like in 5 years? Where are we going? So I think I'd put down what was my thing. What are we building? Who decides what? And yeah, so that sort of starting block.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Peter. Andrew Palmer.
Yeah, I've wrote a couple of things down, and they've all been mentioned, and it's quite nice just to bring them back. I think that differentiation between the business and the family, and what's the successful part, is a starting point sort of thing for me. And then we've also mentioned about we're keen to do the technical training, do some leadership training, do some people training. And then another thing that hasn't been mentioned, which I thought I've seen which is worked really successful, is when family members go away from the farm or the business for 2-3 years and go do something else and then come back, and it gives them, I won't say a cooling off period, but they come back with a different perception of the business and how they can help it, sort of thing. Sometimes it can work in a negative way, because they say, well, we should be doing this, we should be doing this, we should be spending this. But also, if they're on it open and honest, they can just see things from a different light, and it just does work. And I've seen it many times, sort of thing.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Paul Hardman.
I think I would say don't be daunted. This is, family charters. The idea of family charters, I think, are a great idea. In my working life, I've been sometimes frustrated by the fact that the four corners of a legal document don't encompass everything that needs to be said. So I would really encourage people, and not to worry about the outcome, but to start the process. I think because it's starting the process is starting the communication, and I would also say that whilst conflict is probably inevitable, some degree of conflict, that process of working through the conflict is going to be invaluable as well.
Thank you very much. And Paul Harris.
Yeah, I've got 3 L's to share, really. The first one is learn. Learn about this, look into family charters, look into succession planning, get some help if you're not sure where to start. There's so much to learn about being a director, all that we talked about. So learn is my first one. Lead is the second one. Be prepared to lead your family through this process, whether you could be second generation, but learn how to lead as well. And the last word I want to leave you with, certainly from Paul at Real Success, is a word that I think we should all come back to when we're talking about family businesses, which is the third L, which is love. Ultimately, a family business is going to be held together more than anything by the relationships within that family, however that's little or much that is expressed. If we remember that love is at the heart of our business because we're a family, that's normally when push comes to shove. This almost rhymes, doesn't it? Then it's love is the answer. It all sounds a bit cheesy and a bit fluffy, but it isn't. And I think certainly in our business, we believe that the center of a family business is remembering we are family first.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Paul Harris. I think I am going to draw it to a close. It seems to be a good place to stop. So thank you, everybody for taking part. Thank you for all the questions that have come in. I think we will be emailing all participants and giving them some ideas as to where they might be able to get some more information on family charters. I think Peter's Nuffield study is a good starting point, and we'll put any other links on that email as well. And if your question wasn't answered this evening, we will pass it on to our panel of experts and see if we can get it answered outside of the webinar. But I think for now, though, thank you very much for sharing this past hour and a quarter with us, looking at the formula for family-run farm success. And so Nuffield Scholar and Head of Agriculture at Natural England, Peter Craven, Founder and Managing Director of Real Success, Paul Harris, Partner and Corporate Lawyer at Shakespeare Martineau, Paul Hardman, and Head of Agriculture at Lantra, Andrew Palmer. Thank you very much for joining us. And for anybody watching, if you do want to watch the webinar again, I think you'll be able to go to fwi.co.uk/transition, and you'll be able to find this webinar and indeed lots of other webinars on similar and different subjects as well. So I'll bid everybody good evening and say thank you very much.
Thanks, Johan. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.